The disappearance of 26 dock workers from Pier 9 in 1939 was long dismissed as a mystery of the Depression years. Officials claimed the men walked off the job in the night, abandoning their families and paychecks. For generations, their families lived with that hollow story. Then, beneath Port Meridian's riverfront, construction crews cut through a sealed chamber no blueprint showed. Inside were welded steel chests, resin-packed, each bearing the ghost of a raptor's head. What they held would prove the men hadn't walked away at all. They had been silenced for what they witnessed, and the power behind it was still alive, still burying its secrets. The drive to the riverfront was a slog through grids of gray morning traffic. Detective Anya Sharma felt the familiar detachment settling over her, a necessary barrier between the sterile quiet of the records room she'd just left and the raw chaos of a fresh discovery. She arrived at a security checkpoint guarding the entrance to the Port Meridian Flood Mitigation Project, a massive undertaking carved into the city's industrial waterfront. Beyond the fence, a concrete access portal gaped like a wound in the earth, stained by decades of river damp and neglect. The site was already a controlled frenzy. Uniformed officers maintained a tight perimeter, holding back the hard-hatted construction crews and the first curious gulls circling overhead. Anya badged her way through the yellow tape, following the thrum of generators down a steep service ramp. The air grew instantly colder, heavy with the scent of pulverized stone and something more ancient, the metallic tang of long, undisturbed water. The lowest level of the decommissioned tunnel annex was a cavern of oppressive concrete and shadow. The remaining industrial fluorescence cast a sickly yellow light that slicked across damp walls and faded maintenance lines. Colossal support pillars marched into the gloom like a petrified forest. All activity was focused on a huge tunnel-boring machine, its cutter head now still and silent, looming over a breach in the tunnel's secondary floor. Anya approached the site supervisor, a man whose face was a pale mask under a film of concrete dust. "Detective Sharma, Port Meridian Homicide. Tell me what happened." The supervisor gestured with a trembling hand toward the rupture. "We were excavating for the new sump pump foundation. The subfloor here was thicker than any blueprint showed. Then the cutters hit steel, screamed like hellfire." Anya moved to the edge of the jagged hole. It was a brutal tear in the reinforced concrete, revealing a void of black packed earth beneath. And then she saw them. Not barrels, but immense welded tool chests, the kind used for heavy industrial transport. Their steel surfaces were deeply corroded, blooming with dark blossoms of rust. Each bore the faint, ghosted stencil of a raptor's head. Some were still wedged in the dirt at unnatural angles, half swallowed by the earth. Others had been hauled out onto the concrete. "We thought it was old equipment," the supervisor stammered, his voice thin. "The company that built this place, they just walled up old sections, buried their junk. We started hoisting them out." He pointed to one chest that sat apart from the others. A dark, almost black resin had oozed from a fracture in its side. That one, the rust ate all the way through. When the crane lifted it, the corner just gave way. Anya walked toward it, a cold knot tightening in her gut. The smell intensified, not just rust and damp earth, but something else. A cloying chemical sweetness layered over the unmistakable odor of decay. She crouched, pulling on a pair of gloves. The steel was brittle, flaking into metallic dust at her touch. Inside, encased within the dark, resinous interior, details were lost to the shadows. But as a technician shifted a portable floodlight, it caught a glint of dull, polished white. Anya's breath hitched. Embedded in the hardened resin and compacted decay was the unmistakable curve of a human jawbone. The teeth, perfectly preserved, seemed to grin back at her from a tomb engineered to last forever. The sight of the jawbone instantly altered the physics of the tunnel. The professional confusion of a construction snag collapsed into the grim, suffocating reality of a mass grave. Anya stood, her gaze sweeping the subterranean space, reclassifying it. This wasn't a work site, it was a sepulcher. "Lock it down," Anya commanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Nothing moves. Not a piece of equipment, not a single person. This is a homicide investigation." She turned to the nearest officer. "Expand the perimeter to the riverbank. I want this entire annex sealed. Get the MES office down here. Tell them to bring everyone." Within the hour, the subterranean annex was transformed into a sprawling forensic stage. The harsh, white glare of mobile lighting units banished the shadows, revealing a scene of meticulous, grim activity. Anya stood near the edge of the pit, a silent coordinator in the controlled chaos. But her mind was fixed on that jawbone. How long had it been sealed in that resin? And how many more were entombed in the darkness? Dr. Eris Thorne, the city's chief medical examiner, joined her, his expression a familiar blend of clinical detachment and weary gravity. "Well, Sharma, you've managed to excavate a whole new category of nightmare." "What are we looking at, Eris?" "A logistical horror show," he said, adjusting his face shield. "These chests are heavily corroded, but the resin inside seems to have created an anaerobic environment. Paradoxically, the decay is advanced, but some tissue and certainly bone might be remarkably preserved." He gestured toward the dark pit. "But it's deep, and there are layers. This wasn't a single event." The extraction process began. It was an agonizingly slow procedure, requiring custom-built slings and a portable gantry crane assembled piece by piece on the tunnel floor. The teams worked with the precision of archaeologists unearthing a cursed tomb. Each chest was lifted with excruciating care, the rusted steel groaning as if in protest, threatening to disintegrate. As each sarcophagus was placed on the concrete, the true scale of the atrocity began to emerge. 4 chests, then 8, then 12. Anya watched as the line of steel coffins, each marked with that faded raptor stencil, grew longer. The only sounds in the vast space were the quiet directives of the forensic technicians and the scrape of tools against concrete. The damp air grew colder as night fell, seeping into Anya's bones. This wasn't just a series of murders. It was an operation. There was a cold industrial efficiency to it, encasing bodies in resin, sealing them in steel, and burying them beneath tons of concrete in a forgotten tunnel. It was a secret built to be permanent. Near dawn, the excavation was finished. The pit was finally empty. Anya walked the long line of chests, counting them one by one under the flickering work lights. 26. 26 chests, a mass grave hidden beneath the city's feet for generations. Eris Thorne approached her, pulling down his mask. Fatigue was etched into the lines around his eyes. "We've done preliminary scans on the compromised chest. The remains are old, Anya. Very old." The resin, he explained, had protected them from the elements, but the chemical interaction had caused its own unique form of degradation. "Timeline?" Anya asked, her voice raspy. "Not definitive yet, but based on the steel manufacturing, the type of resin, we're likely looking at pre-1950, maybe even wartime." The time frame landed like a physical blow. This wasn't a recent crime. This was history, clawing its way into the present. "Identification? It's going to be a monumental task," Eris admitted. "Dental records are our best hope, assuming any exist and we can track them down." Anya's focus immediately shifted to the history of the annex itself. She had to establish the moment the secret was buried. A team dispatched to the city archives returned hours later with the original schematics. The river tunnel annex was constructed as part of a massive public works project. The foundation for the secondary floor was poured in November of 1939. 1939, the world teetering on the brink of war, a time of frantic industrialization, desperation, and secrets. A time when people could vanish without a ripple. Anya stood amidst the silent steel chests, the weight of those lost years pressing down on her. 26 souls, erased from time, now demanding to be heard. She waited for the first identification, the first name to anchor this sprawling mystery. She couldn't explain it, but this case felt different. It felt personal, as if the ghosts of that forgotten tunnel were calling directly to her. The following days were a grueling exercise in patience. The chests were transported to the medical examiner's facility, where the meticulous and grim process of extracting their contents began. Anya found herself navigating the administrative storm that accompanies a discovery of this magnitude. The city was transfixed by the story of the steel tombs, and the precinct was deluged with calls from journalists, amateur historians, and families searching for relatives lost to the mists of time. Anya remained focused. Until they could attach names to the remains, they were investigating shadows. She needed a starting point, a single thread to pull from the tangled knot of the past. It was late on a Thursday afternoon when the call came. Anya was buried under a mountain of historical building permits when her desk phone chirped. It was Aris Thorne. "We have something," he said, a current of professional excitement beneath the gravity of his tone. "Chest C7. The resin preservation was almost perfect. We charted the dental work, a very specific gold inlay distinctive for the era, and cross-referenced it with military dental records from the state archives." Anya sat bolt upright, grabbing a pen as her pulse quickened. "Who is it?" "Male, early 20s. It's a match for a dock worker named Thomas Renwick." A name. A history. "When did he go missing?" "October 1939. 1939, the same year the foundation was poured. The timing was chillingly precise. Anya immediately began running the name, filtering the department's digital archives for 1939. The results loaded almost instantly, but it wasn't a single missing persons report. It was a cluster. "Aris, I'm looking at the file now. Thomas Renwick wasn't the only one." She scanned the document, her eyes widening as the details coalesced. He was one of 26 dock workers who had vanished from a Pier 9 expansion project, all on the same weekend. 26 men, 26 chests. "Aris," Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. "I think we just found the lost crew of Pier 9. The incident was a historical footnote, a local mystery that had confounded investigators for decades before fading into cold case obscurity. The official inquiry had been brief and inconclusive, hampered by the impending chaos of the Second World War. Anya opened the full case file, a recent digitization of the original microfilm. She scanned the list of names, the scant details of the investigation, the debunked theories that had circulated for years. And then she saw it, a name near the bottom of the list. Liam O'Connell. Anya froze. The air rushed from her lungs, the fluorescent lights of the squad room seeming to dim and warp. She knew that name. It was a ghost story from her own childhood, a name whispered with sorrow by her grandmother. Liam O'Connell was her grandmother's brother, her great-uncle. She stared at the screen, the implications crashing over her in a sickening wave. Her great-uncle, the man whose disappearance had cast a long shadow over her family, the boy in the faded photograph on her grandmother's mantelpiece. She had always known he was part of that lost crew. It was a defining family tragedy. But she had never imagined this. She had never imagined she would be the one to find him, encased in resin and steel beneath a river. With a horrifying certainty, she realized she was investigating the murder of her own family. The professional shield she had spent a decade building shattered, replaced by a raw, visceral connection to the case. The 26 chests were no longer just evidence. They were kin. She walked to Deputy Chief Donovan's office, the case file clutched in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. Donovan looked up as she entered, his expression serious. "Sharma, I heard about the ID, the Pier 9 connection. This is a major break." "It's more than that, Chief," Anya said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't conceal. She placed the file on his desk, open to the list of names. She pointed to Liam O'Connell. "He was my great-uncle." Donovan stared at the name, then back at Anya, his face softening with shock. "Oh, Anya, I had no idea." "I need to stay on this case, sir," Anya said, the initial shock already hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. "I have to be the one who sees this through." Donovan nodded slowly. The personal connection was a complication, but he also saw the fierce, undeniable motivation it provided. "You're still primary," he affirmed. "But you need to handle the notifications personally. The Renwick family. They've waited long enough. They deserve to hear it from someone who understands what this means." Anya nodded, a grim sense of purpose settling over her. She was no longer just investigating a mass murder. She was bringing her family home, and she would unearth the people responsible, no matter how deep the rot went or how powerful they had become. The first forensic reports from the other chests began to trickle in, creating a confusing and contradictory picture. While the remains in chest C7 were definitively from 1939, several other chests contained something else entirely. Alongside the human remains, investigators found artifacts from a much later period. Tools from the 1970s, a rusted Zippo lighter, even the laminated remains of a newspaper from 1974. The timeline was suddenly fractured. It suggested two distinct burial periods separated by more than 3 decades. It felt like a deliberate act of misdirection, a false trail left for anyone who might stumble upon the grave. The discovery muddled the investigation, providing ammunition for those who preferred a simpler, less politically damaging narrative. Deputy Chief Donovan seemed to seize on it, suggesting the 1939 disappearances might be a tragic coincidence, and the real crime was a more recent mob-related dumping in the 70s. Anya felt a prickle of unease. It was too convenient, too neat. It felt like an attempt to obscure the original deeper crime. To pursue the history of the Pier 9 project, Anya went to the city's municipal archives, a cavernous building that smelled of aging paper and dust. It was there she met Elias Vance. He was a civilian archivist, a man who seemed to blend into the shelves of decaying documents, his movements quiet and deliberate. He had the pale complexion of someone who spent more time with the dead than the living, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Anya requested the complete project files for the 1939 annex construction. "That project was overseen by Atlantic Aegis Development," Elias said, without looking up from a crumbling map he was restoring. "A Kincaid family enterprise. They practically built the modern port." He located the files, a stack of heavy-bound volumes. As Anya began to leaf through them, Elias pointed to a discrepancy in the blueprints. "See here?" he murmured, his finger tracing a faint line. "These are the official schematics, but they don't show the secondary egress tunnels where your construction crew found the chests. Those were never part of the public record." He pulled out another more obscure file, a set of military requisitions from the same period. Atlantic Aegis had a number of wartime contracts. Those tunnels were likely built for naval logistics. Off the books. The information was a critical piece of the puzzle. The men weren't buried in a random section of the tunnel. They were buried in a secret, undocumented part of the structure, a place no one would ever know to look for. The premeditation was staggering. Anya spent days immersed in 1939 reconstructing the events from brittle, yellowed pages. The original investigation into the missing dockworkers was, she quickly realized, a sham. The files were disorganized, key witness statements were missing, and the official narrative was a flimsy patchwork of assumptions. Atlantic Aegis Development, even then a corporate titan, had swiftly deflected all responsibility. They claimed the men were employed by a subcontractor that conveniently declared bankruptcy weeks after the incident, its records lost in a suspicious fire. The prevailing theories bordered on the absurd, a mass desertion, an industrial accident. It was a calculated cover-up, aided by the looming threat of war which consumed all public attention. But buried deep within the files, Anya found the handwritten notes of the original lead detective, a man named Fisk. His notes were fragmented, cryptic, but they painted a different picture, one of suspicion, obstruction, and fear. Kincaid stonewalling, Fisk had scrawled in the margin of a transcript. Access to Pier 9 denied. Witnesses intimidated. And then, a single line that sent a chill down Anya's spine. Rumors of unregistered cargo. Naval Intelligence Liaison present at all meetings. The note ended there. Unregistered cargo. This was the first real hint of a motive, a reason why 26 men would need to be silenced so completely. Fisk had suspected the truth, but he had been powerless against the combined might of corporate influence and national security. The files depicted a world of exploited workers silenced by a powerful corporation protecting a secret far more significant than a simple labor dispute. The why remained elusive, but the how was becoming clearer. The crime had been concealed by power, money, and the fog of war. But the decoys from the 70s still bothered her. Why go to the trouble of adding a false layer decades later? It suggested the secret was still alive, still worth protecting. It suggested the organization behind the murders was still active. She took her findings, along with the blueprint discrepancy, back to Donovan. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. "It's compelling, Sharma," he said, steepling his fingers. "But it's also circumstantial history. The Kincaid family is a pillar of this city. We can go after them based on a 65-year-old rumor in a dead cop's notebook. Focus on the 1970s evidence. That's our best chance at a conviction." His dismissal was too quick, too final. For the first time, Anya felt a genuine seed of doubt about her mentor. He was steering her away from the Kincaids, away from 1939, and toward the convenient, muddy waters of the decoy artifacts. The isolation of her position began to feel less like a burden and more like a threat. The confirmation came 2 weeks into the investigation. A partial DNA profile extracted from the remains in chest C12 was cross-referenced against a national genealogical database. It flagged a familial match to a sample submitted years ago by Anya's own grandmother. Heiress Thorne delivered the news with quiet compassion. The victim was officially identified as Liam O'Connell, born 1918, her great-uncle. The abstract historical case was now irrevocably fused with her own blood. The knowledge settled not with a crash, but with a deep, cold ache. The faded photograph on her grandmother's mantelpiece was no longer a symbol of distant family lore. It was evidence. That night, Anya drove to her grandmother's small, quiet house. Elspeth was frail, her memory a flickering candle, but her eyes were still sharp. When Anya told her, the old woman didn't weep. She simply nodded, a lifetime of unresolved grief finally finding its resting place. "I always knew," she whispered, her hand trembling as she touched Anya's. "They said he ran off. Liam would never have run off. He was a good boy." She guided Anya to a dusty cedar chest in the attic. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed linens, was a small box of Liam's belongings. A worn signet ring with the letter O, a handful of letters, and a single photographic negative in a glassine envelope. "This was the last picture he sent," Elspeth said, her voice thick with memory. Anya held the negative up to the dim attic light. It was the photo she knew so well, a group of about 24 men posing on the unfinished Pier 9. They were dressed in the simple uniform of laborers, heavy trousers, worn shirts, flat caps. Their faces were unsmiling, etched with the harsh realities of the Depression era. They stared out from the past with a collective, stern gravity. She found Liam in the back row, tall and lean, his expression defiant. A surge of profound connection, both painful and galvanizing, washed over her. These weren't just victims. They were men with families, with lives, stolen and erased. The next day, she took the negative to Elias Vance at the archives. He handled it with the reverence of a holy relic, placing it under a magnifying light. "This is remarkable preservation," he murmured, his focus absolute. He spent hours with it, his attention drawn not to the faces, but to the periphery. "Something's wrong here," he said finally, pointing to the edge of the negative. "See that scratch? It's a date, 1039. But the way it's etched, the tool used to make that mark is too precise for the period. It looks more like something from a modern engraver." It was another anomaly, another piece that didn't fit, a deliberate, anachronistic detail. While Elias examined the photo, Anya focused on the physical evidence. The procurement records for the tool chests were a dead end. Atlantic Aegis's old records had been lost in a warehouse flood in the 1960s. But the paint was another story. Forensic analysis revealed microscopic flakes of a specific lead-based marine primer used on naval vessels between 1938 and 1941. The chests were almost certainly military surplus. The connection to the Navy, to Fisk's note about unregistered cargo, grew stronger. This wasn't a labor issue. It was a military-industrial secret. Anya felt a growing certainty that the trafficking operation she suspected had its roots in wartime logistics. The same channels used to move secret naval equipment could have been used to move people. The Kincaid family, under the cover of patriotic duty, had built a criminal empire. The organization hadn't just committed murder, it had wrapped its crimes in the flag. She knew she was getting closer to a truth that had been protected for over 60 years. But with that certainty came a chilling realization. If the organization was still active, and if they had gone to the trouble of planting decoys in the 70s, they were still watching. And they would not hesitate to eliminate a new threat, just as they had eliminated the first. The stern faces in the photograph stared back at her, a silent, constant warning. Anya presented her findings on the naval primer and the anachronistic date on the negative to Deputy Chief Donovan. She watched him carefully, gauging his reaction. He listened with his usual impassive expression, but his eyes were guarded. "It's a theory, Sharma. A compelling one," he allowed. "But the Kincaid family's wartime record is impeccable. They have citations from the Department of the Navy, accusing them of running a shadow operation based on paint flakes and a scratch on a photo is career suicide." He leaned forward, his tone shifting from mentor to superior. "I'm telling you, for your own good, stick to the 70s angle. We have physical evidence from that era. It's a solvable case. The 1939 mystery is a ghost." The conversation felt like a door closing. Donovan wasn't just being cautious. He was actively obstructing her. He was protecting the Kincaid family. The realization landed with the force of a physical blow. The rot wasn't just in the past. It was here, now, sitting across the desk from her. She left his office feeling utterly isolated, the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on her. She couldn't trust her own department. She was alone. Her only ally was the quiet archivist, who saw the patterns no one else did. She returned to the archives that evening. The building was empty, the silence broken only by the hum of the climate control systems. She found Elias in his small, cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of books and maps. He had the Pier 9 crew photograph projected onto a large screen, the faces of the dead men looming over them like silent judges. "I found it," he said, his voice a low thrum of excitement. He pointed to the men's hands. "I thought it was just how they were posing, but it's not random. Look." He zoomed in on several of the men. One held his cap with 3 fingers showing, another had his hands clasped, his left thumb over his right, a third had 2 buttons on his jacket undone. "It's a code," Elias explained. "A simple substitution cipher based on their position in the photograph. It's an old Dockworkers tally system used for counting cargo off manifest." Anya stared, her heart pounding. "What does it say?" Elias had already transcribed it onto a notepad. It wasn't a full message, just a sequence of letters and numbers. M class sub LS11. It's a designation, Anya breathed. Naval, M class submersible, long-range scout, vessel 11. It was a piece of classified wartime technology, a prototype. The workers hadn't just seen unregistered cargo. They had seen top-secret military hardware being moved through a civilian port, likely part of an illegal arms or technology transfer. They had stumbled into the world of espionage. This was the secret the Kincaids would kill to protect. Suddenly, another piece clicked into place. "Elias," Anya said urgently, "the Kincaid family runs a philanthropic foundation, the Port Meridian Heritage Society. What do you know about it?" Elias typed rapidly into his terminal. "They do a lot of historical preservation work," he said. "Funded a major tunnel survey and reinforcement project in 1974. 1974. The year on the newspaper found in the chest. The year the decoys were planted. The foundation was the perfect cover. Under the guise of civic duty, they had gained access to the tunnel annex and contaminated the crime scene, creating a false narrative to protect themselves should the tomb ever be discovered. And the chairman of the Port Meridian Heritage Society's board of directors? Deputy Chief Miles Donovan. The betrayal was complete, a cold, intricate web of deceit that stretched from the highest echelons of the city, S elite, to her own mentor, S office. Anya felt a profound sense of dread. She wasn't just fighting a historical crime. She was up against a living, breathing conspiracy, an organization that had embedded itself into the very fabric of the city's power structure. And now, they knew she was getting close. The game had changed. She was no longer the hunter. She was the hunted. The knowledge of Donovan's betrayal was a cold weight in Anya's stomach. She was operating in enemy territory, every official channel a potential trap. She had to move outside the system to build a case that couldn't be buried or discredited. Her work became a clandestine operation, conducted in the quiet hours of the night with her only trusted ally. Elias Vance, the archivist, became her silent partner. Fueled by a quiet fury at the corruption of history, he delved deeper into the Kincaid family's empire. He traced the evolution of Atlantic Aegis development into its modern incarnation, Aegis Global Logistics, a sprawling multinational corporation. The current CEO was Julian Kincaid, the grandson of the man who had overseen the Pier 9 project. Julian was a celebrated public figure, a philanthropist whose name adorned university halls and museum wings, a veneer of respectability built on a foundation of bones. Elias's research uncovered another critical lead. While 25 of the Pier 9 crew were confirmed dead, one man's fate remained ambiguous. A young Irish immigrant named Finn Riley. Unlike the others, there was no death certificate, no burial record. He had simply vanished. Working late into the night, Elias scoured national databases, searching for a man with Riley's date of birth who appeared in census records after 1939. He found him. A man named Frank Miller who had settled in Chicago in 1942, worked as a machinist, and died of natural causes in 1998. The biographical details were a match. Finn Riley had survived. He was the living link, the man who had likely organized the coded message in the photograph before escaping. He had lived his entire life under an assumed name, carrying the secret of what he had witnessed. The knowledge that one of them had made it out, had lived a life, was a small, defiant victory against the monolithic power of the Kincaids. Anya, meanwhile, turned her focus to the modern Aegis Global Logistics. If the organization was born from a clandestine trafficking operation, it was unlikely they had simply abandoned their most profitable enterprise. It had merely evolved. She started a discreet, off-book surveillance of an Aegis warehouse in the city's sprawling port district. It was a fortress, surrounded by high fences and patrolled by a private security force. The head of security was a man named Corbin, a disgraced ex-Port Authority chief known for his brutal efficiency and a distinctive rolling limp from an old injury. Anya watched for weeks, documenting the relentless, seemingly legitimate flow of cargo. But late one night, she got a break. An anonymous source, a disgruntled port worker terrified of Aegis, contacted her through a secure messaging app. The source confirmed her suspicions. Aegis was still in the trafficking business, moving not illegal arms, but people. The source provided a schedule for the next special shipment, a high-security transfer happening in 2 days. This was it, the opportunity to catch them in the act, to link the historical crime to a present-day atrocity. But she had no official standing. A warrant was impossible. Donovan would shut it down and tip them off. Any evidence she gathered would be inadmissible, a product of an illegal investigation. She was at a precipice. To expose the truth, she would have to break the very laws she was sworn to uphold. She met Elias in a quiet corner of a 24-hour diner, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. She laid out the situation, the risk, the moral ambiguity. "I have to go in," she said, her voice low but firm. "I need irrefutable proof." Elias listened, his expression grim. He didn't try to dissuade her. He simply pushed a small, high-resolution digital camera across the table. "Be careful, Anya," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The decision was made. She would infiltrate the Aegis warehouse. She would get the evidence. It was a desperate gambit, a move that would either bring down an empire or destroy her completely. As she left the diner and walked into the cold night air, she felt the weight of the 26 dead men on her shoulders. She was their only voice, their last chance for justice, and she would not fail them. The Aegis logistics hub was a sprawling labyrinth of concrete and steel on the industrial waterfront, illuminated by the cold, sodium vapor glare of security lights. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and salt water. Anya approached the perimeter from the rear, where the fence bordered a dark, disused canal. The darkness was her only cover. She moved with a practiced stealth, her senses on high alert. Using a pair of insulated bolt cutters, she snipped through a section of the chain-link fence, the sound lost in the groan of a nearby cargo crane. She slipped through the opening, a ghost disappearing into the shadows of shipping containers, stacked like monoliths. The adrenaline was a sharp, clean fire in her veins. She navigated the maze of the complex, her movements economical and precise, keeping to the blind spots she had mapped during her surveillance. The tension was a physical presence, a constant pressure at the base of her skull. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every metallic clang echoing in the night amplifying her isolation. She reached the main warehouse, a colossal structure that housed the internal loading bays. A side door, identified by her source, was unsecured. She slipped inside. The interior was a cavern of shadows and towering shelves stacked high with cargo. The air was still and cold. Following the source's directions, she found the secluded loading bay at the far end of the warehouse. It was quiet, dimly lit, an isolated stage waiting for the performance to begin. Above the bay, a narrow metal catwalk provided maintenance access. Anya climbed the steep ladder, her boots silent on the rungs, and settled into a crouch behind a thick electrical conduit. She had a clear, unobstructed view of the bay below. She pulled out the camera and waited, her breathing slow and controlled. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, she heard the low rumble of an engine. The operation was starting. Corbin emerged from a side office, his distinctive limp more pronounced under the harsh lighting. He was flanked by several armed guards who moved with a chilling military precision. They took up positions around the bay, their vigilance transforming the space into a high-security zone. This was it, A large, unmarked tractor trailer backed into the bay, its engine a low growl that echoed in the vast space. A windowless panel van pulled up alongside it. The van's side door slid open. Anya raised the camera, the digital viewfinder casting a faint green glow on her face, her breath caught in her throat as the horror unfolded below. Several young women were herded out of the van, their faces were pale with terror, their movements stiff with fear. They were treated not as people, but as livestock, prodded and pushed by Corbin's men toward the rear of the truck. The scene was a brutal, efficient transaction, stripped of all humanity. Anya felt a wave of cold fury. This was the Kincaid family's true legacy. The same evil that had led them to murder 26 men in 1939 was still operating, still profiting from human misery. She held the camera steady, her finger depressing the record button. She documented everything. The faces of the victims, the armed guards, Corbin overseeing the operation with cold detachment. The women were being forced into a hidden compartment built into the front of the trailer, a modern mobile version of the steel tombs from the tunnel. The doors to the compartment were about to be sealed. She had the evidence, irrefutable proof, and then a flicker of movement from the shadows near the office door. Deputy Chief Miles Donovan stepped into the light. He wasn't there to stop the operation. He was there to supervise it. He exchanged a few quiet words with Corbin, then handed him a thick envelope. The betrayal was no longer a matter of deduction. It was a visible, undeniable fact. As Donovan turned to leave, his gaze swept the warehouse. For a fraction of a second, his eyes lifted toward the catwalk. Anya froze, convinced she was seen, but he looked away, his attention drawn by a sound at the main gate. It was a moment of pure, blind luck. But it was enough. She had him. She had them all. She stayed motionless until Donovan and the van were gone, until the truck's engine fired up. She had the footage, the link that connected her mentor, the enforcer, and the entire Aegis operation. Now, she just had to get out alive. The truck's engine rumbled to life, the sound echoing through the cavernous warehouse. Anya knew she had only minutes before the entire area was locked down. She began to retreat along the catwalk, moving with practiced silence. But as she neared the ladder, a voice cut through the darkness from below. "Hold it right there." Corbin stood at the base of the ladder, his face tilted up into the shadows, a semi-automatic weapon held at a low ready. He hadn't seen her, not clearly, but he had sensed something. A flicker of movement, a sound out of place. He was a predator, and his instincts were sharp. Anya flattened herself against the metal grating, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was exposed, trapped 30 feet in the air. The raid had gone sideways. Gunshots erupted from below. Not from Corbin, but from his men spreading out, firing blindly into the upper reaches of the warehouse. Bullets sparked off the steel beams around her, ricocheting with angry whines. Anya scrambled away from the ladder, crawling along the narrow platform. "Move!" she hissed to herself, forcing her body forward. She reached the far end of the catwalk. The stairs down were blocked. She was pinned down. Her tactical training took over, her mind racing, assessing the environment for an advantage, a diversion. She saw a large electrical junction box on the wall near the loading bay, feeding power to the entire section. She drew her service weapon, took a steadying breath, and fired 2 precise shots. The bullets slammed into the box, erupting in a blinding flash of blue-white light. The warehouse plunged into absolute darkness, the sudden silence punctuated by shouts of surprise. A moment later, the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the scene in a disorienting, pulsing red glow. Anya used the chaos. She swung her legs over the side of the catwalk, landing nimbly on top of a stack of large crates below, then dropping to the warehouse floor. She was now in the maze, the towering shelves of cargo providing cover. A deadly game of cat and mouse began in the hellish red twilight. She could hear Corbin shouting orders. his men sweeping through the aisles. Anya moved through the shadows, creating diversions, toppling a pallet of empty drums to draw them in the wrong direction. She was nearing the side exit, the hope of escape a tangible thing, when Corbin emerged from between two shelves, blocking her path. His face was a mask of fury in the pulsating light. "End of the road, detective," he snarled. He lunged, not with his weapon, but with his body. He was surprisingly fast, his limp forgotten. The fight was brutal and desperate. Corbin was a brawler, fueled by pure rage. He slammed Anya against a steel shelf, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She fought back, using her training, striking at his weak points, but he was larger and stronger. He pinned her against a stack of crates, his hands closing around her throat, squeezing with relentless pressure. Her vision began to tunnel, the red lights blurring into smears. Just as darkness threatened to consume her, she saw a flicker of movement behind Corbin. A figure emerged from the shadows, Elias Vance, the archivist, holding a heavy fire extinguisher like a club. He had followed her, worried for her safety. He swung the extinguisher with all his might, bringing it down on the back of Corbin's head. Corbin grunted in pain, his grip loosening as he staggered back, dazed. Anya gasped for air, scrambling away. She scooped up her weapon from the floor and aimed it at Corbin. But before she could act, the wail of sirens echoed from outside. Not the feds she had hoped to alert, but local police, undoubtedly on Donovan's payroll. They were here to clean up, to erase her. "We have to go, now!" Elias yelled. They ran, bursting through the side door and into the cool night air. They didn't stop, melting into the labyrinthine darkness of the Port District just as the first squad cars screamed into the Aegis compound. They had escaped with the camera, with the evidence, with their lives. Shaken and bruised, they made their way to a prearranged, safe location, a quiet apartment belonging to Elias's sister. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving a trembling exhaustion in its wake. They had survived. They had the proof. But the war was far from over. Anya knew she couldn't go to her own department. Donovan would bury the evidence and them with it. She needed to bypass the entire corrupted chain of command. She had one option, a contact from a federal task force years ago, a man whose integrity was absolute. She picked up a burner phone. "Agent Thorne, it's Anya Sharma. I need your help." The pre-dawn air over the city was cold and sharp. In a mobile command unit parked several blocks from the Aegis hub, FBI Special Agent Marcus Thorne gave the final order. Execute. It was the culmination of 36 frantic hours of work since Anya Sharma's call. The video she and Elias Vance had provided was explosive, a direct link between a respected deputy chief, a powerful corporation, and an active human trafficking ring. Thorne had bypassed all local channels, going straight to the Justice Department. The operation was a swift, multi-agency strike, a federal hammer blow aimed at the heart of the Kincaid Empire. The NYPD, specifically Anya's precinct, was kept completely in the dark. At the Aegis Logistics Hub, tactical teams breached the perimeter with overwhelming force. They secured the warehouse, apprehending Corbin and his security team. The truck, intercepted before it could leave the port, was opened, and the terrified women inside were rescued. At the same moment, another team raided the corporate headquarters of Aegis Global Logistics in Midtown, seizing servers and financial records that would lay bare decades of criminal activity. And in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a third team breached the front door of Deputy Chief Miles Donovan's home. He was arrested in his study, the philanthropic awards on his wall glinting in the agent's flashlights. The final arrest was the most significant. At his sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, Julian Kincaid was taken into custody. His arrogance remained intact even in handcuffs, his belief in his own untouchability so profound that he seemed genuinely surprised. The man who had hidden behind a facade of civic virtue was finally exposed. The news of the raids sent shockwaves through the city. The story of the Kincaid organization, its roots in wartime espionage, and its evolution into a modern trafficking network became a national sensation. Internal affairs descended on Anya's precinct. Captain Wallace, Donovan's subordinate, was suspended, her willful blindness and complicity laid bare. The silence that had protected the Kincaids for over 65 years was shattered. Thorne watched the sun rise over the city, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. It was a victory, but a complicated one. The system had failed for decades, allowing this rot to fester. It had taken one detective operating outside the law and risking everything to finally bring the truth to light. Weeks later, the site of the decommissioned River Tunnel Annex was formally consecrated. The flood mitigation project was redesigned, and the area where the chests were found was transformed into a memorial park. A simple wall of black granite was erected, overlooking the river. Anya stood before the memorial, the names of the 26 men etched into the cold stone. She ran her fingers over the letters of her great-uncle's name. Liam O'Connell. The stone was solid and real, a final permanent acknowledgement of a life that had been stolen. Elias Vance was there, standing quietly beside her. His research had not only helped break the case, but had also ensured that every victim was identified, their stories pieced together from forgotten records. He pushed a wheelchair across the gravel path. In it sat a frail, elderly man, Daniel Riley, the son of Finn Riley, the survivor. He had lived his whole life not knowing his father's real name or the story of his escape. "He never spoke of it," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "But he made sure I knew what it meant to stand up for what's right. Now I know why." He looked at Anya, his eyes filled with a profound, tearful gratitude. "Thank you for giving me back my father's name." Anya nodded, unable to speak. The cost of this justice had been immense, spanning generations. But seeing the names on the wall, seeing the peace on Daniel Riley's face, she knew it had been worth it. The wound that had festered in her own family for so long had finally begun to heal. The long arc of history had, at last, bent toward justice. The ghosts of Pier 9 had been heard. The truth, buried for so long in darkness and concrete, was finally free. The trials of Julian Kincaid, Miles Donovan, and Corbin were a public spectacle, laying bare the depth of the city's institutional rot. The courtroom was packed daily as testimony revealed the sordid details of the trafficking operation and the 65-year cover-up. The rescued women, their identities protected, gave powerful, harrowing accounts of their ordeal. Elias Vance testified as an expert witness, calmly and methodically detailing the historical forgery of the ledger, the coded message in the photograph, and the undeniable links between Atlantic Aegis and its modern criminal enterprise. Anya's testimony was the linchpin. On the stand, she connected the 1939 murders to the modern conspiracy, presenting the narrative from its bloody origins to its final, brutal manifestation. Kincaid's defense attorneys tried to paint her as a rogue cop with a personal vendetta, her investigation illegal, and her evidence inadmissible. But the video from the warehouse was undeniable. And then, the prosecution presented its final devastating piece of evidence, another discovery by Elias. He had found a flaw in the procurement stamp used on the forged 1939 ledger, a tiny break in the digit 9. It was a unique, unchanging fingerprint. That same flawed stamp from the same antique device still used by a Kincaid subsidiary was found on the shipping manifests for the modern trafficking containers. A single bureaucratic habit, a tiny imperfection, chained the patriarch to the sins of his grandfather. The verdicts were swift, guilty on all counts. Kincaid and Corbin received multiple life sentences. Donovan, for his betrayal of public trust, received the harshest sentence possible for racketeering and conspiracy. The Aegis Empire was dismantled, its assets seized. The review board hearing for Anya Sharma was a quiet, formal affair. Agent Thorne testified on her behalf, framing her actions not as insubordination, but as a necessary response to systemic corruption. Faced with the undeniable success of the operation and the exposure of a compromised deputy chief, the board had little choice. Anya was cleared of all wrongdoing, her badge and career intact. She returned to her desk at the homicide division, the familiar chaos of the squad room a comforting anchor. The 1939 photograph of the Pier 9 crew hung on the wall beside her desk. The faded image was a constant, silent reminder of the lives lost and the justice she had fought for. The stern, unsmiling faces of the 26 men stared back at her, no longer ghosts demanding vengeance, but guardians of a truth finally honored. She looked at the photograph of Liam, her great-uncle, a young man frozen in time, and felt a quiet sense of peace. The case was closed. The cycle was broken. But the memory remained, a testament to the fact that no one is ever truly forgotten, that the past is never truly past. On a cool autumn evening, Anya returned to the memorial by the river. The granite wall was illuminated by soft ground lights, the etched names sharp and clear against the polished black stone. She stood there for a long time, listening to the gentle flow of the river, the water that had once hidden a terrible secret. The air was clean, the space open to the sky. The darkness that had once filled a subterranean tomb had been replaced by a quiet, enduring light.